So in this fourth module, we have focused our attention on supply network design, which means understanding how the focal company can shape the supply network to support the execution of its operation and production activities. In particular, we have first talk about the different type of purchases that a company can do. First, viewing what is called the production classification, which distinguish the type of supplies, the type of purchase that the company can do between operational expenditure, which affect the balance sheet in the current year, and capital expenditure, which instead affect the balance sheet in multiple years through depreciation and amortization. And in particular, we have distinguish operational expenditure in raw material. In particular, we analyze the concept of commodity and specialties, components, which are all the purchases that are assembled in the final product, consumables, which are instead all those indirect goods that are not directly used for realizing the final product, but are needed to support operation that then contribute to the realization of the product, like tools, like office supplies, like office furniture, like technology. So they are also called spare parts, maintenance, and they are called maintenance, repair, and operation. Then we have the services, which are instead all intangible goods that are needed to run a company, compared to instead the capital expenditure, which instead include equipment and machineries and tools that are needed to support production from like a capital and asset perspective. Again, this is called the technical or accounting or production classification of what is managed by procurement, which is instead then compared to the managerial classification of what is managed by procurement, which is called purchasing category. A purchasing category is a group of purchased product or service that are likely to be purchased from the same set of suppliers using the same approach in all units and countries. So they have an homogeneity in terms of type of supplier, type of approach used. And if you recall now what we saw about the sourcing strategy, this means using the same sourcing strategy in all units and countries. And let's say the whole list of the purchasing category is called category 3. We've seen some example. I mean that purchasing category is a set of items that a company purchases that have a similar function. They have similar raw material and production processes to be realized, similar specification, or whichever other like characteristic that allow them to be grouped in the same category. For example, printers, copiers, facsimile machines are IT hardware, iron, steel, and aluminum are all metals. Company car fleet, hotel booking, and flights are the category travels, and postal advertising, customer goods, and gadget are the category marketing. As you can see, these are all categories that from a managerial perspective represent the same thing, because again they are homogeneous from a purchasing perspective. They have similar supplier, similar sourcing strategies, and they are likely to be the same across the different type of offices that require them. We've seen example of the category trees. This slide I report just to recall you what a category is for house Airbus. It's a hierarchical representation of what a company purchases. So at the first level we have the, let's say, first level purchasing category: materials, semi-finished products, standard parts, equipment and system, furniture, services, and ICT. And the second level, let's say, the specific item that realize the category group. Aluminium, titanium, and composite are all materials. Cabin hardware, fasteners, and nacelles are all standard parts to realize a flight, a plane. And hardware and infrastructure, software licenses, and maintenance services, application, project, and service, and network telecommunication are all products and service that realize the ICT category. Again, if you rethink of what we discuss about the purchasing, a category, purchasing category include all the items that are similar for what concern the make or buy decision driver, so transaction cost driver and strategic driver, and the sourcing strategy. So all the categories that have similarities in terms of this driver can be grouped or are candidate to be grouped within the same purchasing category. Let's analyze more in detail what we cover about the process of make or buy. So first of all, what does it mean? It means that, again, as we discussed, if a company in a supply chain is just focused on some activities, because, for example, you have seen the example of a car. The car manufacturer, Tesla, does not realize all the car. They realize the assembly, and then all these components, like the belt buckle pad, the interior mirror, the instrument panel, the antenna system, the headliner, the pillar acoustic baffle, they are all bought from external. The decision about what to buy from external and what to realize internally is called make or buy dilemma. So through evaluation of specific driver, companies can understand if it is convenient for them to buy something from the market or to realize it internally. In particular, we have discussed three possible options of make or buy. So making, so vertical integration, which has a long-term perspective because it means investing internally to have the plant and all the resources to realize a particular goods, component, material, service, with investment which are high and the switching cost, which means getting back from the decision, very high. For what concerns instead going to the supply market, on one side we have the so-called competitive market. The competitive market means simply go to the supply market for buying something and choosing the supplier which is making the best economic offer. So it means that usually transactions are spot because I pick the supplier every time that is making me the best offer from an economic perspective. Usually on a short-term perspective, while the sourcing is evaluated and is made with multiple partners, so it's a multiple sourcing, and the relation on investment and the switching costs are low, because again, here I'm not investing in anything outside a one-year contract, and the switching costs are low because it's very easy to step from one supplier to the other. In between vertical integration and competitive market, we have collaborative market. We have seen that at certain condition, it's still possible to establish a relationship with the supply market, but the spot transaction only based on economic condition is not the best solution. Collaborative market means establishing partnership with some supplier that are part of the supply network for repetitive transaction with the mid-term time horizon, because the partnership is supposed to be extended for more than 1 year, where usually strategy are single or dual sourcing or parallel to create loyalty in the supply network, with relationship investment from both parties, the fact that the supplier commit himself on the customer and the customer commit himself on the supplier with long-term contract, and with switching costs that are medium, because again, once you are in a partnership, like reversing the decision is not so easy. So these are our three options. Now, how we get there is made through a decision process which has two levels. So first, we need to understand the so-called market condition. So I understand if I can go to the market only if this market actually exists. So we first need to understand if a supply market exists, and this is made through evaluation of the so-called transaction cost driver instead, or market enablers. Then, independently from the fact that a market exists or not, I need to evaluate if it is convenient for me to go on the market. This is made through the evaluation of other drivers, which are called competence driver or strategic driver. Let's start with the transaction cost driver. Transaction cost driver are these three: descriptive complexity, asset specificity, as uncertainty. The idea is that the higher are this driver, the higher are the transaction cost, and so the lower is the probability that the buyer or supplier will be open in entering in a relationship. These drivers are these three, and we have briefly analyzed in class their meaning and their implication. Descriptive complexity is a market enabler, is a transaction cost driver that is affecting the buyer side, so demand side. Descriptive complexity refers to the difficulty that the buyer has in describing to the supplier what he needs and what exactly the supplier is expected to produce from a buyer perspective. So it's very difficult to describe. We have made in class the example of the control board of an helicopter. It's very difficult for the buyer perspective to describe exactly and univocally and with no degree of freedom what he really needs from the supplier. Why it is a source of risk? Because again, if something is not clearly defined, the supplier cannot meet exactly the expectation, and so the customer, to avoid this aspect to arise, you need to search better supplier, inspecting better the product, switch a lot from supplier to the other in case the supplier is not reliable in producing what was requested, and it needs to establish sanctions and penalties in case the supplier is not compliant to the expectation. All of these are transaction costs, so further search, further inspection, the need to switch, the need to sanction and define coordination mechanism are all aspects that make transaction costs arise on the buyer perspective. So the higher is the difficulty from the buyer perspective to describe what is needed, the lower will be, with high descriptive complexity, the lower will be the possibility for the buyer, or the willingness of the buyer to enter in an external relationship, but instead it will just say, okay, it's too difficult to be described, I will just realize it internally. Instead, the asset specificity is a cost and risk arising on the supply side, because it means the amount of investment that the supplier need to make in order to enter a relationship. And we have made the example of the glass bottle producer for Coca-Cola. So the more the supplier make investment which are specific for this relationship, the lower will be the probability that the supplier can use this investment outside this relationship. So the supplier become tied up to this relationship through this investment. And of course, the higher the investment, which can be capital, which can be training, which can be skills, which can be time, so everything that the supplier is investing to deploy this relationship is considered an asset. Again, the higher is the amount of these assets that the supplier need to put in place, the lower will be the probability the supplier will have a willingness to enter this type of relationship. Finally, we have uncertainty, which is instead a source of cost and risk from both sides, which refers to the fact that the relationship between buyer and supplier can be affected by a certain level of uncertainty. So this relationship is supposed to be a long-term relationship, so potentially it's supposed to exist for a long time, or there is uncertainty about the timing that this relationship will be maintained during time. Of course, the higher the uncertainty of the relationship, the highest will be the probability that the buyer and the supplier won't decide to enter this type of business partnership, because again, if we don't know if we will be still need each other tomorrow, there will be less willingness from the party to invest and to enter in the relationship today. So we want to invest and we want to start something that has the potential to last for some time. So the more there is uncertainty linked to this relationship in terms of, is this relationship still exist tomorrow, after 1 year, after 6 months, so the higher is the uncertainty, the lower will be the willingness of the party to enter this relationship. That's the overview. So the higher are these driver, the lower will be the probability that the focal company and or the supplier will be open to create a business relationship, so the market won't exist, so the option will be vertical integration. Instead, for something which is very easy to be described, that has very low investment needed from the supplier, and it's supposed to relate to a relationship which will be quite stable during time, the higher will be the probability that a competitive market will exist. In between, of course, whenever some of these factors are affected by the contingency of the situation, a collaborative market, so a sort of partnership with the buyer and the supplier, so investment from both parties in a collaborative relationship, can help smoothing the fact that an item can be very hard to be described, and or there is investment coming from the supplier that are needed to enter the relationship, or to smooth the uncertainty linked to the future of the relationship. The other point is that if a market exists, is not said that we need to go on the market, because we need to evaluate the so-called strategic driver. So if a market exists, so independently from the fact that this driver indicates that a collaborative or a competitive market is present, I decide to buy something on the market only if the 3C, competence, cost, and capex tells me that there is convenience to do that. What does it mean? Briefly, we analyze that competence can be key or core, lateral, and special, and here you see the definition. So the key or core are the one that contributes to the competitive advantage of the company: engines for Ferrari, software for Apple, logistics for Amazon, leather manufacturing for Gucci. While instead, the special companies are the companies that are necessary but available externally, and they don't contribute to the competitive advantage, which can be the microchips for computer, brakes for car, surface painting for car or for helicopter or for ship or whatever, software development for like, for example, a control machine. Okay, so these two type of competence are very different, and then there are lateral competence, which are developed for critical process but not linked to the competitive advantage. So they are, for example, Apple with iPhone, so the ability to keep the microprocessor for laptop will allow Apple also to enter the iPhone market before production was just focused on computer. So basically, the competence theory in this case tells you that whenever a competence refers to, whenever a goods refers to key or core competence, so that contributes to the competitive advantage, this goods or service is not good candidate to be outsourced. While instead, if the competence related to the goods or the service is special, again, think about all these type of purchases. Well, these are good candidates to be bought from external, because they are competence which are necessary to be put in the product. We cannot sell a computer without the microchips. We cannot sell a car without brake. We cannot put on the market an helicopter without the surface painted, and we cannot use a machine without the software for automatic control. So these competences are necessary, but they don't make the difference, meaning that they don't create competitive advantage in the market. So in these cases, the solution should be to buy this competence from external. So make and buy. With lateral, you have to evaluate. So if the competence is lateral but is really strategic to develop a future business, you will make this internally. If not, you can stick with externally. Then for what concerns the cost, we have said that, of course, whenever you buy something, you need to calculate if the cost of buy are lower, similar, or higher than the cost of make. Of course, we have said that in case the cost of buy are lower than the cost of make, of course you go for the buy option. In case the cost of buy are similar to the cost of make, usually the cost of buy is more convenient because they save you some investment to realize the production internally. Instead, when the cost of make are lower, much lower than the cost of buy, you go for the make option. Also, you need to consider that buying more gives you flexibility, more flexibility. And we have analyzed this graph when I show you that when a company is more vertically integrated, so buy less, like in this case, the break-even point is this one. Instead, when a company decides to outsource more, so this part of variable cost is higher and is part of fixed cost is lower, the break-even point is lower. So it means that a company that outsources more have more opportunity to reach the break-even. Finally, we also see that we may have also capital expenditure advantage, meaning that if I don't realize something internally, I don't have to invest in assets, or I can free some assets, which means improving some indicator like the asset rotation index or the return on asset or return on investment. So whenever going externally help me saving some capital, of course this is a further advantage that I should consider. This is the final overview, which say that whenever a competence is usually key or lateral, I insource. Whenever a competence is special, I outsource. Whenever cost goes to a reduction, which means cost of buy lower cost of make, and gives me more flexibility, so better break-even point, I go for outsourcing, otherwise I go for insourcing. Still, for what concerns the capital, whenever I can save capital and improve my financial indicator and asset investment, of course, I should evaluate better the outsourcing option. So, through the make or buy decision, we decide what to make and what to buy, and what to make and what to buy, of course, is represented through the category 3. So everything that is in here is bought from external, everything that is not here is supposed to be made by the company. But again, each category require different strategy, in particular a different configuration of the supply network. So the last point that we have to analyze is that, okay, but for each category, how can I define the strategy to be implemented? And this lead us to talk about the sourcing strategy. Sourcing strategy is realized as two levels. One is the configuration of the supply network, basically how many suppliers I want to have for each category. And the second level, which type of relationship I want to establish with the supplier. And we distinguish between multiple, single, and dual and parallel sourcing for what concerns the supply network configuration, and the long-term and short-term for what concerns the relationship strategy. Let's analyze that very quickly. Supply network configuration, which are our options? Multiple sourcing, single sourcing, dual sourcing, and parallel sourcing. For multiple sourcing, basically the supply base is composed by an high number, remember, high number of potential suppliers, which are activated according to the best economic conditions. So it means that I need a purchase of something, and I have a pool of potential available suppliers that I can reach. I issue a request to this supplier, and I pick the supplier who is able to make me the best economic offer, realizing those spot transaction, which goes every time I select a specific supplier. The market is addressed basically on a competitive approach, supplier rotation, because every time I select a new one, and of course this is suitable for standard goods and service, because again, suppliers are not willing to invest with me if I'm selecting every time them just according to the best price. We have seen an example. Usually a multiple sourcing is realized by this. You see, 441 supplier for tools and consumables, which are what we call MRO, maintenance, repair, and operation, and with a pattern in spending that is not like recognizable. You see 6, 6, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1.4. So it means that here I just address the several supplier, and every time I give the contract to the supplier who is making me the best economic offer. Multiple sourcing, the opposite of multiple sourcing is single sourcing. With single sourcing, I have one main supplier in charge to satisfy the most part of the demand. We have seen that this choice can be or for, like in case of let's say forced monopoly market, like Apple with Samsung, or gas supply or electricity, or in case it's an investment in a partnership, like the case P&G and 3M. But basically, for a category, I have a supplier which is considered the main supplier, my sole supplier. As I told you, and as we discuss here, don't expect data to be exactly reflecting the single definitions of one supplier. Usually, we can define a single sourcing when a supplier has higher than 90% of the spending. Higher than 90%, this is a single sourcing. Again, we've discussed that some other supplier can be present for different reasons. One is the maverick buying, due to the fact that not everyone really respect what has been told by purchasing, by saying that just one supplier need to be addressed. But basically speaking, when there is something higher than 90%, can be considered single sourcing. An evolution of single sourcing is dual sourcing, where not only I have one main partner, but I have what is called a backup or one or more backup supplier. So basically I have one main supplier which is in charge of 60-70%, maximum 80, okay? So 60, 70 or 80, not 90, and few other backup suppliers which act as a backup. Okay, we have made the parallel with the safety stock. They are our safety stock. So in case problem with the main supplier arise, they are able to back the main supplier on the purchase that they are supposed to provide. One main and one or more small. And we have seen the case. So in this case, we have one main supplier and two backup that have 21% of the spending. In this case, these two supplier backup hydraulic component purchases in case the main one, Weber Hydraulic, is not able to provide, or some problem arise, or whatever can happen in the relationship. Instead, we have seen an evolution of multiple sourcing, which is parallel sourcing. Parallel sourcing is having dedicated supplier to which have a selected, so remember, a few number of suppliers, so not one, not many, a few number of suppliers which are dedicated to specific family of product, for example, and they are assigned comparable volumes of spending. You have few suppliers with comparable spending within each other, and we have seen here an example. Again, don't expect the number to reflect exactly the percentage divided by the number of suppliers, but 25, 21, 16, 14, 10, 10. We have a limited number of suppliers, 6, with a comparable spending, 2.3, 1.9, 1.5, 1.3, 1, and 1. Okay, so in this case, for heavy carpentry machines, we have supplier dedicated for the family of carpentry machine that the company needs to use for its production process. That's parallel sourcing. Then, once defined the number of suppliers that I want to activate, I need to define the type of relationship that I want to establish with them, divided between short-term and long-term. Short-term is a relationship that has a contract usually not longer than 1 year, mainly focused on price, and where suppliers are, let's say, frequently rotated. Instead, the long-term strategic relationship is focused on long-term contract, so more than 1 year, on several aspects beyond price, quality, delivery time, whatever, made with few partners, because again, the collaborative market has relational investment to be done, which means that you cannot do it with everyone, and it needs specific investment from both sides. So for each supplier that you have defined according to the supply network configuration that you've seen before, you need to define the type of relationship that you want to be put in place with these suppliers.